So new season, a little bit broken, laggy, there's tons of issues, but we got all the updated weapon info. We get the new LC-10, completely unlocked, leveled, all that good stuff. FFAR, assault rifle, which actually does a little bit better at long range than it originally did, and I think it still will fit into the sniper support, and we really got to wait for events for some of these other things. G-grip is on page 7, a little bit disappointing. I think the vertical grip is still generally going to be the way to go. This isn't a significant difference compared to the vertical grip in terms of improvement. It's either about the same or worse. So I think the vertical grip will still be generally the way to go. They did a bunch of weapon balancing changes. Initially, it doesn't look like they did much to bullet velocity, an extra 50 meters. But if you put on a barrel that adds 40% or over pressured, or a muzzle that's adding more to this, it's multiplying this number out. So realistically, an extra 50 here could be like an extra 80 total overall, which is pretty significant in terms of bullet registration, distance, gunfights, those types of things. And they tried their best to get people to use the marksman foregrip, but that is not going to happen. Gun kick is the visual shake, but it's not going to actually help the actual recoil, unfortunately. So sadly, I don't think we're going to see too many attachment changes. AK, all these weapons get buffed in terms of bullet velocity, and then those attachments get changed. SMGs get a little bit of a buff. Doesn't really change their damage profiles at all, so that's pretty solid. And then we have LMGs getting a little bit of a rework. Get rid of the middle damage range, nerfing them up close, and then pushing that damage range up to like 70 or 80 meters in a lot of the cases. Basically, meta's pretty similar, and we updated that spreadsheet if you want to go ahead and check that out. That's all linked near the top of the description. And then if you go ahead and tab over, you guys have 2 tabs. It'll have all the SMGs, including the brand new LC-10, which you can see nothing crazy, but it's right up there with the Saug, KSV, and that's kind of where the drop off for a lot of those guns. And after that, people go with preference a lot of the time. We also have the long range meta, which you can see some guns kill faster than others. Unfortunately, XM4 didn't get a buff. And then we can see where the FFAR is. In here, it's that middle section where it performs decently all the way across the board. It does have a fast fire rate, so it'll feel a lot like an M13. Not saying it's like an M13, but it'll feel like that in terms of how fast bullets come out. And it kills pretty quick. Only need to get it to level 31 for the meta build, or 26, I believe it is. So you get the extended mag, maybe it's 27, and then the LC-10 is only level 31. You don't have to max level those weapons for the meta builds that we're going to talk about. Sniper support, FFAR might be the king. Obviously, it's up there with the AK, but I think its recoil is better than the AK. A little bit easier to use, but there it is. So we kind of have that, and then we'll jump in the loadout. So not in any particular order, because there's going to be preference. I'll tell you kind of what the top players are using in terms of pro players and competitive level, playing for money. But if you're just playing the game, you don't really need to worry as much about that, because all these are going to be pretty good options. So we got the FFAR, pretty much a similar build that, for the most part, that's kind of what you're going to use. Obviously, if you go 8 attachment, you just put it on overpressured. I think the extra bullet velocity, like this thing gets 1200 plus, which is huge. They've done this with the newer guns where they're giving them a significantly bigger benefit. And so in some cases, if you wanted a little bit more range, you could go ahead and put on the reinforced, but that one you got to get on level 34. So I think for the meta build, it's only level 31, I believe, or 27 for this gun, and that's mainly for the extended magazine. So you do get the bigger magazine. Instead of the 45, you'll get bumped up to 60. If you're playing solos, you could always go with the smaller mag. With the Kompakt, pretty much a similar build that we've had for quite a while now. Nothing crazy where they're not reinventing the wheel. Unfortunately, they added a new attachment. Nothing really like salivate over, get excited about. And many people, even when they do unlock it, you'll probably never use that attachment. Maybe there's some use cases where it's going to be really good, but as of now, I don't particularly see it. So this is the FFAR. You can kind of see how it's going to look. The iron sights suck, so it's not like the original where you were able to just bust out the iron sight and rock with it. You can still shoot pretty straight with it, but I think the iron sights are atrocious, so I wouldn't really advise that. And then we got the Kompakt, which I think this one's kind of like where you could mix and match a bunch of different guns. Like we talked about the KSV. I think the MX-9 probably fits in there. PDS. There's a bunch of guns that you could mess around with at this end of the spectrum in terms of SMGs. In terms of rifles, we're still going to be using that Grau, which is on the SWAT 5.56. If you need the attachment, you're going to go ahead and have to level this up and then also unlock it in the armory, I believe. With the new season, it got bumped over to the armory. Pretty standard build. One thing that a lot of people tend to ask is, why aren't you using the monolithic suppressor? Why aren't you using the monolithic suppressor? Well, it slows down the gun way too much. Even in this case, the aim down sight speed, 181. If we did do the monolithic and it wasn't bugged, you lose 40 milliseconds in aim down sight speed. Pretty punishing, especially if you're going to jump into a gunfight. It'd be nice to stay off the mini map and get the extra bullet velocity, but it's just kind of not worth it to take that ADS penalty, especially with how fast the TTKs are on the spectrum in terms of how fast they've gotten compared to when it was much slower about a year ago. So pretty standard build that we would go with for a lot of our guns. This is the LC10. And then when we go into the firing range, Grau, it's what we've had for the whole time. The game's been so buggy and laggy with the servers. I don't know if they fixed even the monolithic on it, so it works differently. But overall, pretty standard build that we've had for a while. And then this one, you can see it's a little bit bulky and it does that weird. Obviously, they still got things they got to fix. But overall, not terrible iron sights. And you can see that you could challenge at medium range. 25 meters is pretty far. And it has very little recoil at the further range. So maybe you could drop some of the recoil attachments if you felt comfortable and then maybe invest in movement or something like that. Because you can see this thing does shoot very straight. Again, not a broken TTK, but also a respectable one. And then we have the Kilo, which is still a pretty reliable gun. Even though they did rework some of its recoil stuff, it's not going to be noticeable to most people. Maybe it feels like a little bit more. Obviously, when we broke down Metaphor's world record, he used the Kilo with 8 attachments. And you just basically go ahead and go with flinch and bullet velocity. Those are what you're using for it. Other than that, pretty standard build for a lot of our long range options. And then we have the Ladra, pretty similar. You can go with the Ranger or the lightweight. Depends on how you want your movement. I generally, not lightweight, vertical rather. So you get way less recoil. It's just easier to manage your guns. And then you're pretty much set up that way. Kilo. Yeah, it's not going anywhere. You might have to adjust a little bit more at the furthest ranges, but as long as you're hitting your shots with the Kilo, it's going to be pretty fine. And then the Ladra, kind of what we've had for a while, a little bit harder to use. So there is that trade-off compared to what we've seen with the LC10 that kills a little bit slower, but that's that accuracy trade-off with the weapon. So it's kind of how you're going to have that. And then we get into the Amax, which is still pretty solid option. Basically kind of the same. Like I said, they're doing more to expand the meta and not necessarily destroy it, which is kind of good. A lot of people's big complaint like, oh, I feel like I have to level a new gun every other week. Rest assured, you have the guns leveled from last season. It's the same guns. And then we have the Saug, which you can see kind of here is built out that way. And then Amax is still going to be a straight shooter. Overall, I think a lot of people are kind of starting to go away from this just because the Krig is so much of a straight shooter and it kills pretty quick as well. But I think maybe some people will experiment with the FFAR for sniper support. I know a lot of people like I like the Amax quite a bit. Then we got the Saug, which is one of my more favorite close range options. I think the C9 is kind of like taking it over in terms of popularity. This is another armory one. If you missed it out in season 2, same like the Krig, you have to grind out that 250,000 XP. Unfortunately, if you haven't done that, it takes a bit. Spam contracts, good luck with that one. And then the top 2 options are the Krig and the C9, which kind of been pretty solid for a while. If you played last season, you probably already have these leveled. And that's kind of how that part works. C9, pretty typical builds. And then as we get into the firing range, you're not going to notice much of a difference with these guns from last season. You got a little extra meter or whatever from the C9. But I think the reliability to be able to shoot straight, even at the further ranges, is pretty nice. The extra bullet velocity across the board is going to be a lot better for a lot of guns. And I think more things are going to start to shine. If you do like the Fang, sure. If you like other LMGs, go for it. I'm not an LMG enjoyer. Unless they're completely broken, I don't really see a lot of justification to jump on that. Let me know what you guys are thinking, how you guys are liking it. Appreciate all the support. Thank you for watching as always. Have a great day.